This is Mark Lane.
This is Robert Groden.
This is Dick Russell.
This is Dr. David Mantic.
This is Cyril Weck.
This is Jim DiEugenio.
This is Jerry Policott.
This is Gerald McKnight.
This is Bill Pepper.
This is Richard Belzer.
This is Governor Jesse Ventura, and you're listening to Black Op Radio.
Video computers online. Archiving 44K. Initiate sequence.
T-minus 30 seconds.
Server connection confirmed.
T-minus 25 seconds.
Live stream 21 at 20K.
T-minus 20 seconds.
Phone lines are go.
T-minus 15 seconds.
Satellite uplink verified.
T-minus 10 seconds.
Flight check complete. Satellite uplink verified.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Black Op Radio, the voice of political conspiracy research. You're listening to Black Op Radio, the show NSA doesn't want you to hear. Now here is your host, Len Osanic.
You're on the air.
Hello everyone, welcome to another segment of Black Op Radio. This is your host, Len Osanic. Today we have the privilege of being joined by Walt Brown. Hello, Walt.
Hi, Len.
Pleased to speak to you.
Back.
Yeah, pleased to speak to you again. It's been a while. I understand that you have a new book ready to go. A lot of people are writing books as there's a lot of interest in the 50th, and so now is the time to release something. I guess just before we get into that, for listeners who are not familiar with you, can you just give us a brief background of your interest in the assassination and then what got you into the topic of writing?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I was 16 years old on the day Kennedy was killed, which puts me over 40 now. It was just too horrible to believe. My father was 40 days older than John Kennedy, and my parents took it hard. I was an only child. It was just a bad time. And on Sunday morning, when the alleged assassin was shot and killed on TV, other family members were nearby, and it was like a celebration. And I simply said to him, "Now you'll never know what happened." That's what got me started. And subsequent to that time, people had said, if you could ever have tried a client in a courtroom, I simply Oswald, not O.J. Simpson or any of these other people, Bernie Madoff, Oswald. Eventually, in the 1980s, I reread every book I had on the shelf, and it was a lot of shelves, including the Warren volumes, which I've read 6 times. I have to bring myself to closure. And I sat down in November of 1991, and I started writing something called The People versus Lee Harvey Oswald. And it was based on Warren Commission documents, whatever data I could find. Prosecution makes their case, defense makes their case, which of course they didn't do back in 63, 64. And I came up with, it was originally 900 and something pages, and I was satisfied and done. I was ready to walk away. I had the answers I needed for myself. A couple of people looked at it and said, "Well, this is a book. Get to somebody." And it was published. It took about 10 weeks to write it at night because I was working. And it got published, I sold it 2 months after I finished it. And it came out in the fall of 92. They gave me an option on a second and a third book. And I just stayed with it. And the more stuff I came upon and the more people I interviewed and the more documents I found, I just realized there was always more to be done. And as a result, in 2005, I just decided I was going to line up all the ducks to the extent that I could do that. I started on a chronology, which is what you referred to at the top of the show as the new book. It's almost 32,000 pages long, so it's a CD-ROM. If anybody wants it in book form, it's available. It would be 64 volumes, and it would cost about $5,000 to have it, to have the pages printed and then, handsomely bound and of course gold stamped on the binding, whatever. I'm having one set made for myself. But it's a CD-ROM, and it's as complete as I could make it, up to the point where I had to say, I can't do any more right now.
Okay, good.
Let me just tag on to that.
Sure.
The hope is that I included in the copyright request the ability to reversion of rights to myself as the publisher, so that if somebody comes along that's 30 years old and has a real grasp of events, and they say, Walt, I'd like to continue your work, I'll have the ability to say, yes, you have my permission, go ahead. So it could someday be 100,000 pages. I don't know, depending on what we learn. And there have been several significant things since the day I shut it down, which was 4 weeks ago yesterday. You know, the closing off of Dealey Plaza, the auctioning off of Oswald's wedding ring, which was announced a day or so ago. Yeah, stuff is happening.
Right. I was just going to get back to an early point that started your journey, was your parents said, now we'll never really know what happened.
I said that to them. Everybody was thrilled that Oswald had been killed. This was, you know, he was a commie. You know, the whole PR campaign that had been already built around him, and it was Jack
right.
Ruby
It's taken
was a hero.
years to shed that. But my question was going to be to you, when you started looking into it, did you have that preconceived notion then that this guy was a commie and you would find out more about him?
No. I took it as a blank slate. I just said, let's find out what the real deal was. And for instance, the communist thing. It's easier to join the Communist Party than it is to become a Democrat or Republican. But he never joined the Communist Party. For all of the posturing that he did, he never joined the Communist Party. And I don't think he was really ever in touch with the posturing that he was doing. Because I found an interesting document by one of the law enforcement people when he was arrested in New Orleans for, he was handing out leaflets, and a couple of anti-Castro guys came up and pushed him around, threw the leaflets up in the air, and Oswald and the rest of them were arrested. They were released on their own recognizance. Oswald spent a night in jail. He was bailed out, and then he went to trial. The other three were told, hey, don't do it again, and they walked out the door. Oswald was convicted and paid a $10 fine, so he had something on his record. But while he was in custody there in New Orleans, one of the police officers picked up a pamphlet. Okay, the name just came to me. Corliss Lamont. Oswald was asked about him, and he said, well, it's not a him, it's a she. And it's clearly indicative that Oswald didn't even know what he was handing out. So the more important thing, however, if you dig deeper into Corliss Lamont, is that he, being viewed as a radical left-winger, for want of a more honest label, he and countless others like him were constantly being denied the United States passports by the head of the passport office, a woman named Frances with an E, Frances Knight. And it came down to Lamont and others going to the Congress and giving testimony and going to the federal court system and saying, we're American citizens, we're not lawbreakers, we're entitled to passports. But this red-hating woman will not issue us passports. Now, how did Oswald get one to come back from Russia? How did he get another one saying he was going to go to Russia or Finland or God knows where from the same woman? It boggles the imagination. He would have been the last person on the planet Earth to be issued a U.S. passport from that woman. Once he defected to Russia, he would have never been allowed. She wouldn't have given the go-ahead to him to get back, much less get another passport. Unless, of course, he's somebody other than what we've been told. So that's where that goes.
Okay, so what are some of the early things that stand out as catalysts to do this enormous research work? Because I think for a lot of people, there are some one or two things they come across and they say, well, if this item here is true, it blows everything that I ever thought about the case upside down.
Well, amazingly enough, it's something that happened at the time, and it stayed with me, and I could just never let it go. When Oswald had his press conference on Friday evening, when the cops brought him out to show the press that essentially to prove they weren't beating him up to get a confession, someone said to him, "Did you shoot the president?" And his answer was, "Nobody axed me." A-X-E-D. Nobody axed me about that. And I thought, what a moron. How could you be that stupid to say something like that? No, it should have been, "Nobody has asked me that." And then the closer I got to it, and it didn't take long, it's just assumed that Oswald was fluent in Russian. I'm thinking, this guy wasn't fluent in English. And I took up the study of the Russian language because my undergraduate and graduate school minor had always been Russian history and Soviet politics. So I took up the Russian language. And I realized within about an hour of dealing with the Russian language that Lee Oswald could never have mastered the Russian language. So there's something very wrong with that picture. And from there, I just kept going. Who is he? Who was Marina? What was the dynamic of the event? How could anybody be so stupid as to be charged with a crime in Dallas, Texas? And when they ask you, who do you want for an attorney, you say John Abt, A-B-T, who was reasonably famous for defending people who violated this, what was called the Smith Act, which was a law that made it, federal law making it illegal to advocate the violent overthrow of the United States government. Essentially, he defended commies. And Abt became a communist himself in 1931, but he stayed in the closet. And on the 50th anniversary of his coming out in 1981, he made it public that this was the 50th anniversary. But Oswald could not have possibly picked a worse choice. So why did he do it? Why did he pick somebody like him? I mean, you might as well announce it. He did it, but he never announced he did it. And when you look down through history at lone nut assassins, the first thing they want you to know is, I did it. And the classic in that case is the guy that killed Garfield. He had hired a taxi to take him to police headquarters. And Oswald just didn't fit the lone assassin profile. And I did studies of hundreds of political assassinations, which is one of the appendices in the CD-ROM that I just published. And it's called The Assassination Parables. The vast majority of well-known major assassinations have been conspiracies. The average age of the victim is very close to the age Kennedy was, and the average age of the assassin is very close to the age Oswald was. And that was skewed by one guy that was 79 years old, but when you study a couple of hundred of them, it's not going to change it all that much. But
okay, so now for people listening, they want to maybe get more information while they're listening, where you have a website, and where can we find information about this?
It is included on the JFK Deep Politics Quarterly website, and I'm having a website constructed, but it's not done yet. They could reach me email-wise through the address that you used, KIAS as in Sam, KIAS JFK at AOL.com. And those CDs arrived a week ago right now, and I've already had inquiries like 3 or 4 days ago from Australia. And I don't know how these people know, but they know. And it's very encouraging when something like that happens.
Okay, so the best thing is for people, I'll make a link to your email, and they can just email directly to you.
Sure, absolutely. Because I must have had 200 emails to deal with. I guess it was Monday or Tuesday. It just click, constant. And the information goes out because I have an attachment that I just, thank you for your interest, see the attachment. I'm trying to raise money to get 1,000 copies of the chronology in libraries of major English-speaking cities, major universities. Well, to me, any university is major. So there is a place for donations, and there is also an auction with items listed on the back, some of which are one of a kind. And it's my Kennedy collection that's up for sale in order to get this out there. Because I wouldn't expect libraries to buy it, so I'll give it to them. And of course, in today's world, libraries appreciate CD-ROMs more than 64-volume sets of books.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your research then. Why don't you discuss, I earlier brought up just an early catalyst, but what are some of the interesting items, tidbits that you developed through your research that maybe people don't know about the case?
Okay. The most important single thing is the more data you have, the more complete picture you have of events. If you pick up a 200-page book, and it could be a decently written book, but all you really have is the border pieces on a jigsaw puzzle. You need as many pieces as you can humanly get. And that was the whole point of just data, more data. Does this corroborate this? Does this contradict this? And you find some just amazing things. Rachel Oswald, who's going to turn 50 years old on the day that I'm speaking out in Pittsburgh in October 19th. She was asked, what do you think of your Uncle Robert Oswald? You know, because Robert Oswald sold out his brother Lee in a heartbeat. And she said, I've never met, spoken to, or seen Robert Oswald. And that blew me away. There was a challenge thrown down to Robert Oswald. Give us a DNA sample, because we want to match it up with the two daughters, Lee Oswald's two daughters. And he wouldn't do it. And he could have destroyed many, many years of several people's research simply by giving that sample, just by putting it on the block and saying, here it is, but he refused to do it. And that's telling. There were numerous instances, more than you can count, where Oswald is somewhere where he couldn't have been. The Warren Commission published, among other unnecessary items, Oswald's report cards. And in one instance, they published his report card from the fall, I believe it was 1953, when he was a student in an intermediate school, middle school, junior high, in New York City. And he was present for 67 days, which is not the doings of a truant, which Oswald supposedly was. From September to December, he was present for 67 days. And as a teacher, I knew from years of experience that you got about 70, 71 school days in that period. They also published a few pages later his report card from a school in Louisiana at the same time. So you got Lee Oswald, student in Louisiana, present most of the time, 65 days. Lee Oswald, student in the Bronx, same semester, same year, present 67 days. His passport applications, night and day different. The first time he applied for a passport, his mother was a certain age, his father was a certain age. When he applied the second time, his mother got much older, his father got much younger. And he spelled his mother's name wrong, which was one of those things that it was like fingernails on a blackboard. His spelling is horrendous in the English language, but in Russian, his spelling is perfect. And I defy anybody that has a background in linguistics to tell me how that happens. And as a corollary to that, the Warren Commission was concerned. How could this guy's spelling be as bad as it was? Because he had a tendency to squeeze words together. If he tried to spell a 12-letter word, he'd spell it in 8 letters. And they did a study. They commissioned the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, to do a study. And I used to carry those words in my pocket when I went to educational conferences, and I'd pull it out and I'd say to the muckety-muck, what can you tell me about the person that spells these words like this? And they'd look at it and they'd say, how old is this? I said, 22. Oh, my God. Severe handicap in language. Yeah, okay. Could that person just sit down and teach himself Russian? Not a chance. What the study proved at the Mayo Clinic, and of course the Warren Commission didn't do anything with it because they didn't like what it said, they said when Oswald looked, when he was reading, he could not capture the full field of a long word, like independence, or let's say a word like bookkeeper. And when he tried to spell it, he'd botch it because he couldn't capture the full field of that word. And my question is, if he couldn't do that when he was reading, how could he capture the full field of a moving target in a rifle scope? Because it's the same thing.
Or be good enough to be considered an interpreter for his Russian ability.
Oh, yeah. The Russian, I kid people, if Will Fritz had said to Oswald, tell me what a declension is, I walk, you walk, he walks, Oswald would have looked at him like, don't ask me questions I don't know. And the Russian language, believe me when I tell you, it is extremely difficult. It's got a whole different alphabet, and the difference between printing and script is monumental. You have to know when you reach a stressed or unstressed syllable, and that's a challenge in English. The words are so long, and it's a lazy, guttural language for the people that speak it. I don't remember the last time we spoke, but I went to Russia a couple of times just to see how good my ability was, to get around and whatnot. And as it turned out, I brought a woman from Russia back with me. She went through Oswald's writing with me. She said, it's perfect. It's better than most Russians could do. And then I showed English spelling. And she said, how long was he in Russia? I said, 2.5 years. And she just said, no, not possible. Not possible. And his time is all taken up. So where did he learn Russian?
Do you subscribe to the John Armstrong?
Yes. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I was on the phone with him this morning. But absolutely. Because one thing that comes through loud and clear, and it came through in my work, and John certainly did more in it than I did, there are too many times and too many places where there's too many Oswalds. And some of it is simply someone setting Lee Oswald up with a resume. Now, we could quickly go through the resume that he had on November 22nd in the United States.
Sure, go ahead.
He was pro-Cuban. He tried to get to Cuba when he went to Mexico, if he did any of the stuff, because he went to embassies. And going to an embassy does not get you anywhere. If you want to travel someplace, Cuba, Russia, you go to a consulate. When I went to Russia, I had to go to the Russian consulate, not the Russian embassy. When this woman came back here, she had to go to the American consulate, not the American embassy. Night and day difference. He was handing out pro-Castro propaganda. He somehow worked his way out of the Marines on a hardship discharge, which, by the way, was not documented in any imaginable way. In America today, you cannot get a hardship from your job or from anything without immense documentation. And when all the documentation is checked, whoever is going to grant that disability is going to pick a medical individual and say, you're going to go and visit this character, and you're going to make a decision. There was no hint whatsoever documented that Oswald needed a hardship discharge. They wanted to get him out of the Marines so he could get to Russia in decent weather. But he had a resume that just, wow, it's perfect. He's an assassin. But if you flip the coin on Oswald's resume, and if Khrushchev had been killed in a limousine on November 22nd, Oswald had the resume for that too. He quit school when he was 16 years old and sat in the recruiting office till he turned 17 so he could join the Marines. He was gung-ho. He worked at top secret CIA installation in Atsugi, Japan, with the U-2 aircraft. He, quote, defected to Russia and came back, and with photographs that he'd taken with a very small and very expensive camera. So the two resumes exist. It's just a matter of which file you want to pull out. And there's a case in point where when you accumulate the data, all of a sudden patterns start to emerge. And the one thing that I found, and I found an awful lot of connections of all places, not the CIA and not ONI, but U.S. Army intelligence. And one of several things that happened in an odd way over the weekend of the assassination was, and again, it was just put out there in the water, and people just took it for what it was said. Just like Oswald is fluent in Russian, they said that Army intelligence had a file on Henry Lee Oswald, but it was destroyed while being thermofaxed. And I wrote up a lengthy footnote in the chronology saying, one thing we all need to do is understand America in 1963, technologically. There weren't cell phones. A dial phone was a luxury. A stamp cost 4 cents. Color TV was in its infancy. A lot of things we take for granted today. I've got a photograph of what looks like 4 refrigerators lashed together being hoisted onto a cargo aircraft. And those 4 refrigerators lashed together are a 5-megabyte hard drive for a computer. And they would barely fit they wouldn't fit in a walk-in closet. And now you could put 10,000 computers in a walk-in closet. But the thing about the file being destroyed, when something was thermofaxed, now we just call it faxed. When something was thermofaxed in 1963, you put one page of a document into a cylinder that rotated rapidly and had a phone connection attached to it. Where you were sending that file, they had to have a phone connection operative in the machine, and the document came out at the other end. But it was done one page at a time. So to say the file was destroyed by being thermofaxed, it meant they burned up one sheet of paper after another. And that doesn't happen that way. If you start one fire, you're not going to start a second one.
Now, earlier you had just said Henry Lee. Was it Henry or Harvey Lee?
No, the U.S. Army intel file, I believe, was Henry Lee. But it is very common in military intelligence files where they make a little wiggle room in the name. Because you can find Lee Henry Oswald, Henry Lee Oswald, Harvey Lee Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald, and of course Alec spelled different ways. And going back to his Russian ability, there's a document in the Warren Commission files. It's dated January 1961, that was before he married Marina. Yeah, it was before he married Marina. It's a letter from someone in Russia named Ernest Tidovets, who was a friend of Oswald's in Russia, and the letter was sent to Texas, so obviously it's not 1961. The Warren Commission fudged it, and the reasons for that become apparent as you get into it. It's a 2-page letter, and it's to Marina, or Marinochka, the cute name in Russian, Marinochka and Alec. The first page and a half are in Russian, and they're to Marina. The final half page is to Alec, and it's in English, explaining what was written to Marina in Russian. And it mentioned, your baby's going to be a year old soon. Now, the first child was born in February 15th of 62. So this January letter would be January of 63. But if a Russian friend of Oswald's is writing to Marina in Russian and to Lee in English and explaining what the Russian says, that tells us a whole lot about Oswald's Russian ability. Another thing I discovered, when you overlay the U-2 aircraft, which Oswald had something to do with in Japan, but he couldn't help the Russians shoot the thing down unless he could develop a missile system that would go high enough to shoot it down. Oh, let me ask you a question. What kind of factory did Oswald work in when he was in Minsk? Do you remember?
Radio factory.
It was a radio factory. Yeah. And it's generic. It's just like in Stalingrad when the Nazis and the Russians fought over the tractor factory. This was the radio factory. But oddly enough, there were too many coincidences to call them coincidences. That factory also produced experimental radar, and Oswald had been a radar operator in the Marine Corps. Again, the chronology of the U-2. It's shot down on May the 1st of 1960. Very soon thereafter, Oswald joins the hunting club at the radio factory, which allows him to purchase a shotgun, not a rifle. Rifles are illegal. Were illegal in the Soviet Union for reasons that became obvious in Dallas, Texas in 1963. He bought the gun for his own protection. Oswald then attended the trial of Gary Powers in August, and as soon as that trial was over, he began the steps to get himself brought home. And none of that's an accident. And in my thinking about all of this, I think Oswald originally, and probably unknowingly, was the scheduled U-2 patsy, because Eisenhower grilled Allen Dulles about the U-2 and said, look, what's the deal with this aircraft? Dulles says, nothing to worry about. It can't be shot down. The Russians have nothing that they can get it with. Okay, Eisenhower says, what about if the plane has some kind of mechanical failure? And Dulles just laughed the thing off. He said, it's constructed so lightly it will disintegrate on the way down. And at 68,000 feet, a pilot does not want to jump out of a plane because of the pressure. In theory, your intestines explode and your blood boils.
Not only that, I heard that they had rigged it to explode. It had a self-destruct button, but that would go...
Yeah, there was a 2.5-pound destruct mechanism built into the aircraft, but that was essentially to destroy the camera. Now, of course, once that thing pops, the plane is going to spiral down and it's going to crash, and you're not going to land the thing. Once he popped the canopy open, but he could not hit the ejector switch because his legs had been scrunched under the front console. His legs would have been amputated if he tried to eject. So he had to work his way out of the seat. And by this time, the plane's fallen down. He's hanging out for dear life. He tried to reach for that destruct mechanism, which supposedly was like a 90-second timer. But the pilots didn't trust the CIA. They were afraid you hit that switch, it's going to all go at once. So Eisenhower had been assured that the plane's going to disintegrate. They'll never take a pilot alive. So you got nothing to worry about. Now, they told Eisenhower they wanted to get as much intel as they could before the Paris Summit Conference, because once the Paris Summit Conference created détente in 1960, we can't send an aircraft over Russia after that. So we got to find out what we can before you guys make nice at the Paris Summit. So Eisenhower said, all right, fine, but make sure they go in April 1960. April 30th is the deadline. Well, it was already May in the United States when Powers took off. I think it might have even been May in Pakistan when he took off.
Well, yeah, I subscribe to a different view that it was meant to fail, that they did not want...
Absolutely. The plane that Powers was supposed to fly was literally taken off the taxiway for routine maintenance, and plane number 360 was put in its place, and Powers, in his own memoirs, said that plane was a dog. And few people realize it, but Gary Powers' flight was the first ever attempt to fly completely over the Soviet Union.
Right, on May Day, on that Soviet holiday, right?
On a day when Khrushchev had invested his political career in the fact that he and Eisenhower will be able to go to Paris and hammer out peace. Because that May Day, there was thousands of doves released, there were giant wooden doves in Red Square, and the American ambassador, Llewellyn Thompson, all of a sudden saw somebody with a lot of braid and a lot of scrambled eggs on his hat come running out on the top of Lenin's tomb, where I've been, and there's a huddle. And he said, looking back, that was the moment when Khrushchev was told that they had shot down a U-2. And the U.S. said, yeah, one of our planes, got lost over a lake in Turkey.
There's a whole story to that. We could go into that another time,
yeah.
I think. But
then the Russians
subsequently, I think that...
we got the pilot, and we shot him down
Yeah.
over Sverdlovsk. So your stories about San Diego, California are wrong because we shot him down over Hudson's Bay. And that was the end. But my view on the whole thing is that, as you said, it was meant to fail, and it was going to fail. But Powers wasn't going to be taken alive. And the blame would have fallen on Oswald. This all happened because a Marine radar operator defected to the Soviet Union. He told them what to do. Powers alive, all bets off. So Oswald had Patsy practice. And as soon as that deal was over, there's so many coincidences that revolve around that. Like I said, we can't spend a week on the U-2. But I did a separate appendix just on the U-2 in the chronology. Because if you piecemeal it, you lose it. You lose the connections. But when you put it all in one place, it's solid.
Now, let's move a bit to the Warren Commission itself then, because that's where a lot of people, if they're not quite sure if Lee is involved or not involved, when you start to discover the Warren Commission, they're an accessory after the fact.
Absolutely. For all intents and purposes, they were an accessory before the fact. Hoover had all kinds of blackmail stuff on Earl Warren for extramarital affairs. So Hoover and Warren need a marquee name to be in charge. Who better than Earl Warren? Hale Boggs gets appointed. Well, he happened to represent the congressional district of Clay Shaw. Richard Russell, over his strenuous objection, gets appointed because he's the Senate Armed Services Committee chairperson. He's the Senate's man to the military and the intelligence community. Allen Dulles, former head of the CIA, fired by Kennedy. It didn't happen in the United States, but in foreign capitals. And again, this is stuff I discovered in memoirs and what have you. In foreign capitals, when Allen Dulles' name was announced as part of the Warren Commission, they knew the fix was in. You're not going to get the truth. You're going to get what Allen Dulles wants you to know.
Well, it reminds me of when the 9/11 Commission was starting out. They were going to name Henry Kissinger as one of the people, and I went, "Are you kidding me?"
And he's only wanted as a war criminal in 5 countries. But I'll give you one. A resolution had been introduced in the House of Representatives prior to 1963 to impeach Earl Warren as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And, of course, Jack Ruby was out in the middle of the night taking pictures of the poster over the highway, impeach Earl Warren. Who introduced the resolution to impeach Earl Warren? Michigan Congressman Gerald R. Ford. Now, tell me how they're going to get along. The testimony is absolutely fraudulent. The people, Too many people were told their testimony. And then you got about 200 other people whose testimony is absolutely meaningless, and it just adds bulk. And every time I've ever seen an apology for the Warren Commission, it used to include Jerry Ford and David Bellin, or 2 or 3 of the people, and they would be looking at the 26 volumes and say, see all that? You couldn't compile that stuff and be wrong. Well, I got 64 volumes, so I guess I'm right. But it's all cornflakes inside the hamburger meat. But again, I guarantee you there were times, good afternoon, Mr. Osanic, my name is Arlen Specter. I'm here on behalf of the President's Commission on what, of course, you realize is a matter of grave national security. And your testimony is critical because there are issues at stake here that we have to resolve. We have to get to the bottom of it. So when the stenographer comes back from taking a cigarette break, you'll be sworn in. I'm going to ask you about the 3 shots you heard from the Texas School Book Depository, and I'll ask you a few background questions about yourself. Please do not answer anything that you're not asked, because it'll confuse the people who up the chain who are going to read this and evaluate it. So just please stick to the answers, the questions as asked. And it was just that simple. And when Zapruder testified, nobody asked him his perceptions. And at the very end of the testimony, he turned to Wesley Lieber and he said, you realize a lot of people think there were 2, and it stops there. And Lieber says to him, Mr. Zapruder, your films are very helpful to the commission. Years after that, Lieber was shown that snippet of testimony. And he said, I can't imagine that I ever said that, or that ever happened. What does that tell you? One of the critical things that I tried to do was to, and this was long before the chronology, to find the stenographers, because they knew the story. They knew stuff that happened on the inside that all inspector was never going to admit to, and that witnesses were scared to admit to. And at the end of the day, I could only, from reading the volumes, I could only identify 3 stenographers. And the one that came up the most was a woman named Odell Oliver. Okay, who is she? Well, when you dig deep enough, you find out that Odell Oliver was the court reporter for Judge Sarah T. Hughes, who swore in Lyndon Johnson. I'm not a believer in coincidences.
So the fix was in
every imaginable way. They had a cooperative stenographer. If she comes out and says, whoa, wait a minute, I took the dictation when that guy gave his testimony, if he didn't say that, well, she comes out and says that, she loses her job with Sarah Hughes, and probably her certification as a stenographer. So they got everybody by the shorties. And the magic bullet was one of the more bizarre inventions. What do you remember from what the doctors who saw the hole in Kennedy's throat, what did they believe?
They thought it was an entrance wound.
Okay, because it was small and, for all intents and purposes, perfectly round. That could have been an exit wound. It could also have been an entrance wound. But the problem is, if it's an exit wound, it means the bullet going straight out. The bullet isn't yawing, it's not tumbling, it's making a tiny hole as it goes straight out. And then 34 ten-thousandths of a second later, it hits John Connolly sideways in his shoulder.
Yeah, I mean, you're preaching to the choir here. I don't think anyone believes that at all.
Well, the pictures where the bullet turns and drops, it could not turn sideways, because the hole in Connolly's coat and his shoulder was like the shadow of a bullet. It wasn't a little hole. It came out of Kennedy straight, and again, in 34 ten-thousandths of a second, it turned 90 degrees. Even if Connolly had been in front of him, which he wasn't.
Yeah, which he wasn't.
And the House Select Committee concluded that that bullet entered Kennedy and exited Kennedy on an upward angle of 11 degrees. So the only way it could have hit Connolly was if Kennedy had been shot while he was tying his shoes.
The whole thing doesn't make sense.
They bought it. And where did Oswald fit in? He was the chump that was supposed to be Cuba. This was supposed to get everybody mad enough to finally, once and for all, root out their rat's nest in Cuba. And instead of America getting mad, they got sad. You followed the newspapers for 5, 8, 10 days. Less and less, Oswald is Cuban, communist. He's just a malcontent, a loner. The whole Cuban angle winds down tremendously. But initially, Hidell Heidel bought the rifle. Oswald didn't. How it was ever shipped or collected can't be explained, because Oswald had a post office box in Dallas, and the only person who could receive mail there was Lee H. Oswald. The rifle is sent to Alec Heidel, and Oswald collected it? How? If you mail me something to Alec Heidel, well, today it would probably just be put in my mailbox, but it doesn't work that way. And the pistol is even more bizarre, because he paid $10 down and the rest was COD, and it was shipped Railway Express to a post office box, which cannot be done. The only thing that can be put in a post office box is United States mail, not UPS, not FedEx then, and certainly not Railway Express. And as a COD, who paid for it?
Yeah,
The mailman
exactly.
didn't.
Yeah.
The mailman didn't pay for it, and both guns had been rebarreled. Another coincidence. So you couldn't really do the kind of ballistic stuff you wanted to do because the guns had been rebarreled.
Well, I don't think anyone thinks that Carcano did anything that day.
David Bellin and the rest of them did.
Yeah, well, those guys are liars.
The gun is junk. If you trace the pedigree, those things were imported, I believe, into your country, and they were bought by the pound. So some jobber brought over 4,000 pounds of surplus junk and was paid by the pound.
Yeah, like scrap metal.
Yeah. Then they cannibalized what they had. This stock is still good. That trigger guard is still good. We can use that barrel. They cannibalized all the stuff and sold them for $3 wholesale. And then it winds up in a catalog for $12. And why anybody would put a scope on that gun is unimaginable, because there's no real place to mount it. And it's just a horrible gun. It was created for battlefield scenarios where 10,000 guys are aiming at 10,000 guys, and you fire, and you're going to hit something. Maybe it's not what you're aiming at, but you'll hit something. It was certainly not a sniper weapon. And when you look at the page that Oswald supposedly purchased it from, every other gun on there gets rapes. And the Mannlicher Carcano is just, hey, for sale.
I don't even think that ad has a timing issue where they say, here's the rifle he must have ordered, but that ad didn't come out till later.
The gun that he supposedly ordered was not the one he got, the model number. And as a curiosity, the one that he ordered could have been broken down and would have been small enough when broken down that he could have carried it the way Wesley Frazier described it, cupped in his hand under his armpit. But the one that was found in the book depository was 34 inches when broken down, and you got to be a serious basketball player to put that thing in your palm and stick it under your armpit. So none of it works. Where did he get the ammunition? Where did the sling come from? Where did the clip come from? Never explained, just assumed. And the FBI went through millions and millions of cartridges from rifle ranges in a 50 to 75 mile radius of Dallas-Fort Worth. And I think they came up with 80 possible Mannlicher Carcano cartridges, none of which matched the ejector marks from the gun found in the book depository. So God knows how many federal agents had to take the suit jacket off, get down on their knees, and rummage through brass for days, just so Hoover could make his report.
Now, one thing I did want to ask you about, you mentioned Hoover, was LBJ, and I would say that there was a slight controversy amongst researchers whether they feel Lyndon Johnson had any role or not. What's your feelings on, your revelations of your research on Lyndon Johnson?
Well, there's a couple of things. I've read Lyndon Johnson as the mastermind. There's people trying to sell T-shirts and baseball hats for November 22nd in Dallas saying LBJ did it. I don't believe it, because at the end of the day, LBJ was a gutless coward. If you take the 1960 election as a model, LBJ did not enter one primary. He had good people around him, key political people that, somebody I'm going to say like George Stephanopoulos, just to throw out a name. If you want to take the other side, Karl Rove, God help us. But a key political operative that knows which buttons to push, knows the inside. He had those people pushing him. Lyndon, get into this primary. Wouldn't do it. And the Russ Baker book that talks about the Bush family tells how back in the day, Kennedy and Johnson slugged her out in the primaries. No, they didn't. Johnson did not enter any primaries. He was given dozens upon dozens of invitations to speak at rubber chicken dinners away from Texas, in California, in Nevada, in Illinois, in Pennsylvania. And initially, he would sign on to them, and within a week or so to go, he bailed out. He figured this kid Kennedy, who's going all over the country, going to those rubber chicken dinners, and has his own political mafia working for him, isn't going to make it on the first couple ballots, and then Lyndon Johnson, will win it all in the cloakroom, which of course didn't happen. And I just cannot believe. And the second reason is Johnson was absolutely overwrought with unimaginable psychoses. I mean, there should be a good psychobiography written of him, because I don't know how old you were in 1964, but it was the last election in which I did not vote. He could not imaginably have lost that election, but he bailed out numerous times just out of fear. There were stories that, in his words, because this was a phone call he made, Ms. Kennedy, meaning Jackie, is going to show up at the Democratic Convention in Atlantic City, New Jersey. She's going to go up there. There's going to be applause, and she's going to say, the next president of the United States should be Robert F. Kennedy. And there's going to be a stampede, and Johnson's going to be tossed out the window. And he believed that. And he had press releases written to say, I'm withdrawing my name from the nomination. I'm not going to, be put in this kind of bind. And he had it all ready to go based on his own fears and perceptions. And when Walter Jenkins got caught in the men's room of the YMCA in October, Johnson again, I'll withdraw. Barry Goldwater's going to win because, one of my guys got caught on his knees in the men's room at the YMCA. And Johnson is so paranoid, he hadn't noticed that within the 3 days of that happening, Herbert Hoover died, Khrushchev was deposed, the Russians launched a 3-man thing, which had never been done before, and the Yankees lost a 7-game to the Cardinals. And Walter Jenkins made page 9. But Johnson was terrified. And Cartha DeLoach, Hoover's number 3 guy in the FBI, covered the whole thing up, just as DeLoach did with Bobby Baker. And DeLoach was the guy that Jerry Ford ran to every time the Warren Commission hit a roadblock. And then Ford went into the House Select Committee, and they said to him, were you giving secrets back and forth to Cartha DeLoach? Ford said, never. I would never do that. Well, thank you, Mr. President. And that was it. But Johnson, as the mover and shaker, no. Did he have an understanding that if it happened, he and Hoover would cover it up? Absolutely. Absolutely. Did he have an inkling it was going to happen? Absolutely. But was he the go-to guy? No. I will never believe that. And in the books that say it, when they deal with Johnson's character, they're right on the dime. And then you go look at the footnotes, and it's all taken from major Johnson biographies by Caro or by the book The Flawed Giant, Dalek. They're taken. What's said about Johnson's character is taken from known published materials. Then it goes off into how Johnson micromanaged the Dallas police and the Secret Service and these people, and the facts are just all wrong, and it's unfortunate because it points the finger in the wrong direction. If there was anybody on the ground in charge of it, it was a different guy from Texas who came from a famous political family. Right. But I don't think it was Johnson.
Okay, but as an accessory after the fact, I think, just putting together the Warren Commission and that.
Oh,
like you
absolutely.
mentioned. Yeah.
He was concerned because the Senate was going to hold hearings and the House of Representatives was going to hold hearings. And he's on the telephone with Hoover saying, this will be a circus. It'll be televised. And both of them are complaining that it would be televised. And they say, how are we going to head this off? Well, we could appoint an independent commission. So Johnson, a Democrat, does something that no Democrat president ever did in history. He appoints a commission of 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats. Unheard of. Unheard of. And that was the end. And you can hear him say it on the tapes, and you can read it in the transcripts. He'll tell people, I'm appointing this commission. I need you to protect my flanks. Against what? Protect them from the truth? And the reason I stressed the 2 of them complaining it was going to be televised, when J. Edgar Hoover testified before the Warren Commission, his testimony was filmed. He had an FBI camera crew, Klieg lights, had the whole thing, and it was filmed. The problem was, when he got done talking, J. Lee Rankin and one or two others, and Hoover, got together and rewrote Hoover's testimony to make it even better. And if you're sitting there holding the Warren Commission volume, I think it's volume 5, with Hoover's testimony, and you were watching the film, the words spoken are not the words you read. So the film part of Hoover's testimony was never made public. I think they probably have it on a loop somewhere in the J. Edgar Hoover FBI building, which is an absurdity. But it's the irony of it. We can't have this stuff televised. No, but I'll have my testimony filmed. And he committed perjury about 15 times.
What would one example be?
Hoover's perjury?
Yeah.
He could personally state that Oswald was not an FBI informant, and one beyond all reasonable doubt. And I don't know about the CIA, and I don't know about ONI, and I don't know. Lee Oswald was legally an FBI informant, and the documents have been published. Because when Oswald was, the first time the FBI got to Oswald after he came back, and Oswald didn't like that they were getting in his face, and I'm thinking, yeah, handcuff him and tell him he's under arrest for treason, see how much he likes it. They said to him, have you been contacted by any individual from Soviet intelligence? He said, no. And this is B. Tom Carter and John Fain, the FBI men. They said, if you are contacted by someone from Soviet intelligence, will you pass that information along to the Bureau? Yes, I will. Done. That makes him a potential criminal informant, a PCI. He has promised to provide information as necessary to the FBI. He's an informant. Jack Ruby worked as an FBI informant. So Monday's paper should have read FBI informant kills FBI informant. But instead it said Ruby kills Oswald. And even in the absence of those documents, the director of the FBI, there is no director of any federal agency in 1963 that could categorically have denied that an individual was an informant with that agency, because the street agents had their own snitches, and sometimes the agent's partner didn't know who the snitch was, much less the group leader, much less the SAC of that office, much less somebody in headquarters. Unimaginable. And I worked for the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs as a special agent for a year. I know how the informants worked, how the system worked. My boss wouldn't have known who my informant was unless I came in and I said, look, I need a ton of money to get the following information. And he's going to say, who is this guy? Who can he get you? What's he got? But otherwise, nothing doing. Nothing doing. I met George McGovern in National Airport before it became Reagan Airport when his wife's cosmetic case damn near exploded all over the walkway. And McGovern is cursing up and down. I was putting an informant on a plane to get him out of Washington for his own safety. The guy's name was George. I have no idea. George. What? George. I don't even know if that's his real name, but we paid him for information. And when push came to shove, we said, hey, we're putting you on a plane. You don't want to be in Washington for a while. Get out of town. Here's some money. George. Informants are private. But Hoover couldn't very well say, we have no way of knowing, because that would not have been good.
Well, I think calls were made to Katzenbach and others on Air Force One, that day saying, we have our man.
Oh, sure. And subsequent to that time, there's memos saying we have to convince the public this guy did it. Those things can be taken two ways. It can either be taken as, look, we got to sell this lemon to the public, or else the truth will come out. Or it could be taken to mean we don't have much of a case, but we don't have anybody else in custody. And they're two different scenarios. And of course, people don't want to see the first one described, see it that way. But they didn't go looking for other. As soon as they had Oswald, that was it. The bus stations weren't closed. Love Field was closed because the president's aircraft was there. But they didn't close the bus stations. They didn't close the train stations. They didn't set up roadblocks on all the major arteries, major highways leaving down. Nothing. The head of the Secret Service closed the United States border from Texas that night. James Rowley was the head of the Secret Service. And the new Secret Service building is named after him, and he's the only head of the Secret Service that ever lost a president. When did the Secret Service legally begin protecting the President of the United States? 1951. When Harry Truman signed the law, he looked up and laughed, and he said, you guys are legal now, huh? They were there. There were Secret Service men in proximity to Garfield when he was shot. There were Secret Service men with McKinley, and they stepped out of the way so he could be photographed with some movers and shakers in the political world, and Czolgosz stepped up and shot him. But they were not designated as presidential/dignitary protectors legally until 1951. And the last bit of politicking that Lincoln ever did was with the head of the Secret Service, and he was discussing counterfeiting, because that was rampant in the Civil War.
Tell me a little more about this CD-ROM. What's on it, and what's going to encourage people to pick it up?
Well, it's broken down into parts. There are 4 what I call books: Book 1, Book 2, Book 3, Book 4. The first one is from 1823, when the first Kennedy that came to the United States was born. That's where it starts. And he died on November 22nd in 1858. And that one goes 1823 right up to November 21st of 1963. And you see the first one's grandson was Joe Kennedy. So his great-grandson was President Kennedy. And you see the development of John Kennedy, war hero, congressman, senator, president. And you see the evolution of policies. And one of the amazingly critical things that came out of a chronology, and I've asked this to other people, and some people get kind of close to it. From July 1st, 1963, until the assassination, until the car turned the corner off of Main Street, let's say, what was the most important event in John Kennedy's life, and what was the most important event in Lee Oswald's life? From the middle of 1963 until, let's say, November 21st. And my interpretation is, for Kennedy, it was the loss of his little boy. I mean, on a personal level, it was devastating. On a presidential level, it was a reminder that if we go into Vietnam, we're going to be bombing the jungle and killing civilians, including babies. And I don't think he was going to have it. For Oswald, the most significant day was the day he got arrested for the leaflets, because that was his resume. Those 2 events happened on the same day, August 9th. Kennedy's little boy died. Oswald was arrested. That's where chronology kind of trumps just hypothetical books. Book 2, and they're all titled D. Book 1 was Dynasty. Book 2 is Death. It's November 22nd, November 23rd, November 24th. And it's John Kennedy and Oswald. Book 3 is Disappointment. It's essentially the Warren Commission. Anything that happened afterwards. Johnson making phone calls, the Warren Commission, all of it. And then Book 4 is Discovery. And that's when people like you took an interest, and people like me took an interest, hard on the heels perhaps of Mark Lane and Harold Weisberg and those folks. And 90% of what we know about that event came about because private citizens cared enough to find out what happened about that event. And that goes right up until May 29th of this year, which would have been Kennedy's 96th birthday, and that was the day I stopped it. So that's the 4 books. Then there are 15 appendices, stuff that doesn't ideally lend itself to chronology. Kennedy's speeches are included, from announcing his candidacy, debates, what he said to the Houston ministers, his inaugural, some press conference stuff, and you see the evolution of the man as a political leader and as a commander-in-chief. There's an appendix with just the evolution of Marina Oswald's testimony before different varying groups. FBI reports, Warren Commission, House Select. I don't remember right now. There's one appendix that's characterizations. people that you and I would know the names, but when somebody else that knows the name talks about them, some guys that worked with J.D. Tippett said X, Y, and Z about him. But when did they say it? You can't put it in a chronology. But what they said about him is important. There's one appendix with my odyssey from November 22nd, 1963, up until the last day that it was there. Stuff that's happened. Researchers that have gotten my face because they didn't like that I didn't, bend over and kiss their papal rings, whatever. Just stories about things that happened on the way to figuring out who killed Kennedy. The assassination parables. Then there's a section with all of the medical testimony in one place from any source. There's a motorcade participants testimony section. There's an appendix containing all the known testimony from organized crime members. I was going to do one for members of the Communist Party, but it would have been 7 pages long because they just asked, "What's your name? Yeah, do you know who Lee Oswald is? Nope, thanks, goodbye." There was nothing to it. There's a U2 in there. There's a lengthy Jack Ruby in there, simply because they took far more testimony about Ruby than they did about Oswald. And that's a very telling story. And for people reading the first part of Book 3, Disappointment, there were several hundred pages of FBI reports taken all over the United States on November 24th and 25th and 26th. People that knew Jack Ruby, and how the FBI knew who all these people were that knew Jack Ruby defies belief. I mean, they found people from Providence, Rhode Island to Skunk Rock, Wyoming. And did you know Jack Ruby? Yeah, sure, I knew him. We grew up in the 1920s. When was the last time you saw him? Oh gosh, maybe it was before the Depression. Do you know of any connection to Lee Oswald? Oswald wasn't even born in 1939. But there it is. And it took up space in the volumes. And there are some things that are absolutely fudged with regard to Jack Ruby. They published the Secret Service records of Jack L. Ruby up until 1943, because once he went in the service, the Selective Service has nothing to do with you anymore, the draft board. Once you're in the Army, they're done with you. So they've got the complete Selective Service records of Jack L. Ruby up to 1943. The problem is, Jacob Rubenstein did not become Jack L. Ruby until 1947. So whose records are these? Because I guarantee you, Ruby might have changed the name on his driver's license, but he damn sure didn't call a draft board in Illinois and say, I changed my name now that I'm 30-something. Of course it didn't happen.
Actually, one name you mentioned I did want to bring up a little bit was J.D. Tippett.
Okay.
Do you have any opinions on what happened to Tippett and what he was supposed to be doing that morning?
Well, one story that seems credible is that when he said goodbye to his kids that morning, it was not an ordinary goodbye. Secondarily, he went home for lunch, and where he lived and where his patrol district was about 10 miles. So on the day that the president's in town, for him to drive home 10 miles, have a peanut butter sandwich and a glass of milk, and then go back 10 miles, that seems strange. But once the shooting happens, he gets told, and I'm sure you've heard the phrase, be at large for any emergencies, out in Oak Cliff. He stationed himself, which, first of all, you never station yourself. Be at large for an emergency means you patrol, you drive, you look. He sat in the parking area of a gas station, a Glauco gas station. I think Glauco stood for Good Luck Oil Company or something like that. As it happens, that Galacco station was across the street from this very spot where Lee Oswald would have gotten off the bus if he had taken the bus from the book depository to 1026 North Beckley. When the bus got there and Oswald didn't get off, Tippit took off speeding like a bat out of hell up the other direction, Jefferson Boulevard, pulled somebody over. We don't know why. Checked the guy out visually, and then he went into the Top 10 record store, which is on Jefferson, a few blocks from the theater, and he made a telephone call. And I always assumed, wrongly, that he made the call from a payphone, because I wish I could have found out, did the dime drop or not? Because if he picks up a phone, puts a dime in, makes the call, and he just stands there, the assumption is it wasn't answered. But if somebody picked up and says, do this, do this, do this, and say nothing, click, then the dime drops. And when he walks out the door, he's following orders. It didn't happen that way because he made the phone call on a house phone, which was in the Top 10 record store until a couple of years ago. But that was at 111. He's dead 3.5 minutes later. So he literally left that store and drove to his execution. And it makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. At least as we've been told, it makes no sense. Why would he pull over somebody walking along? The only person that was being sought at 1:14 in the afternoon is the person or persons suspected in the assassination. And here's a guy walking along. That's not an escaping assassin. Pulls the guy over, doesn't call for backup, doesn't take his gun out, gets out of the car, goes to go after the guy, and gets shot dead by somebody. Makes no sense. I put a hypothesis in Treachery in Dallas about, I think I wrote it 20 years ago, but it wasn't published until 95, that Ruby and Tippit both had been made aware of alternate realities in the sense that tomorrow, Friday, while Kennedy's here, Castro is going to be killed because he's going to be surrounded by Texans. The cabinet's in Japan. Kennedy's here with his advisors, but he's surrounded by Connolly, Johnson, whoever. Castro's going to be killed on November 22nd. When that happens, you got to get Kennedy real quick to say, go to the armed forces and get in there and just clean out that rat's nest. And that's what Ruby was thinking, and that's what Tippit was thinking. And Tippit, I think, was under orders to arrest Castro's assassin. But when he left his house that morning, he knew it was going to be a different day. And then, of course, Signal 19, shots fired at the president. Oops. This is now a different story. Ruby was 3 blocks from Dealey Plaza and did not go to see his beloved president. And when he heard what happened, his reaction was far more extreme than anybody else in the news building. Of course, it was the Dallas Morning News, and they printed the hate ad that day. So they clearly weren't Kennedy lovers. But something other than what happened was in the minds of some people on the table. And then the tables got suddenly turned upside down. Tippit, long suspected of having an affair with somebody, one of the witnesses to the shooting said, where was Tippit's car parked? She said it was parked, when I looked at his car, right beyond it is the house where he lived. Well, he didn't live there, but somebody that he kept a lot of company with lived there. And one of the people I did a tremendous amount of work with, a man named Jay Harrison, who was a Dallas police officer on November 22nd and died in May of 2005. He knew Tippit very well. And he kept telling me, Walt, this stuff about Tippit having an affair, it's nonsense. And he took me to meet Sergeant Jerry Hill, who was at the book depository at 1:45, and then he got in the car and took off to the Tippit crime scene, and he was at the Texas Theater. He was holding Oswald's pistol in the car, taking Oswald into the DPD. So Jerry Hill knew his way around. And I said to Hill, Jay and I have always had this debate. Tippit was faithful to his wife. Tippit was running around. And Hill looked at Jay and said, which one are you? And he says, Jay did not fool around. And Hill just shook his head and said, if he had lived another 6 months, she would have divorced him. And Hill went into chapter and verse on Tippit. And that was a real surprise to Jay Harrison. And just for old time's sake, that night we went and had dinner at Austin's Barbecue which has since been leveled. But there's a whole lot more to J.D. Tippit than ever met the eye. Because what do you know about him? He was born and he died. He was cited for a bunch of violations. He made a point of not calling in when he should have, like when he went into the top 10 record store. And there were 2 cops supposed to be in that district. The other one went right to Dealey Plaza, so Tippit was alone. Be at large for any emergency. That means you're driving around in your car, being obvious. Maybe you're even going a little faster than usual with the siren going to be obvious. But you're keeping things quiet. Because one thing that I've always said, and I'll always maintain it, when Kennedy was killed, when that shooting was learned of, 5 different groups of guys could have gone into 5 different banks and emptied the vaults, and the cops wouldn't have had a chance. But nobody did. It was a unique crime opportunity. It just didn't come to pass.
How much is the chronology? And people are going to email you directly to pick this up?
Yeah, and I ship pretty quickly.
Get a web page made, where people can get it.
Again, it's, you can look up, do a search for JFK Deep Politics Quarterly, or they can go to your link and hit my email. It's $89.95. It's a lot of money for a CD-ROM, but you're getting the equivalent of 100 books with 32,000 pages. If you buy one, because everybody that studies Kennedy has friends that study Kennedy. So the deal is, if you buy one at the regular price, you can buy up to 4 more at half price, which is $45. So it means if you got 4 friends, you buy 5 of them, it costs $270, and they come out to $54. Donations are more than welcome to get the thing into libraries. And if anybody's curious about the Kennedy memorabilia auction, which, as I said, some one-of-a-kind things, some interesting autographs. I have the last surviving step that Oswald was standing in front of in the backyard photos. Things like that I've had for years and years.
Now, you mentioned you're going to Pittsburgh this year. You're going to be speaking there?
Yes. Yeah, I'll be speaking at the WECT conference October 17th, 18th, and 19th at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh. And anybody curious about that, just do a search for WECT conference and then click on annual conference 2013. It'll give you the whole schedule, who's who, whatever. It's very professionally done. And I was there 10 years ago, and it was far and away the most professional conference I've ever even been close to. They had 8 cameras on the speaker, and they had a production truck outside, like at a pro football game. All right, switch to camera 3, close-up, camera 4, come in for a close-up. It was incredible. And there were monitors every 20 feet on both sides of the auditorium, so no matter where you sat, you were never more than, a few feet from a large monitor to see, the speaker's real expressions and whatnot. And they had cookies and lemonade in the back if you needed something. It was just
okay,
so
great,
professionally done.
Now tell me, what are your views about Dallas this year?
Dallas right now is a disappointment to me because I was one of the founders in COPA, and I got a schedule, it's almost 3 weeks ago now, and they had 14 people scheduled to speak on Saturday morning, John Kennedy, in a 3-hour panel. And I said, wait a minute, that's 12 minutes each. You can't do a presentation in 12 minutes. I've taken more than 12 minutes to answer some of your questions. And the answers I gave you were the tip of the iceberg.
I
sent an email to them. I said, wait a minute, Sunday you're devoting to Malcolm X. This is the 50th anniversary in Dallas. I know COPA is the Coalition on Political Assassinations, plural. I understand that. But this is unique. This is Dallas. It's Friday, November 22nd. And the first real event they have on Friday, November 22nd is at 6 o'clock, and that's a dinner. And I said to them, use the time. You're only going to have one 50th anniversary. Because the next time there's an anniversary, most of the people that are going to be there this time won't be there next time. They'll be in a place where the whole truth is available. And I just sent a message that, it cost me $2,000 to go there. I can't do that for 12 minutes. And they said, well, you'll probably get 15 to 20 minutes. I said, excuse me. It's semantics now. You're being silly. And I'm just tremendously disappointed. I think the situation will change. I think some of the people who see the whole 12-minute concept will say to heck with it, and they'll wind up with 8 people for 3 hours, and you'll be able to make a presentation. And I would be doing you too, in more depth than I did it with you, because that's the front bookend militarily of Kennedy's administration. Right before he goes in, it's you too. After he leaves, it's Vietnam. I don't want to get into that.
Oh, come on. You got another 5 hours, don't you?
Well, when I say Vietnam, I don't want to get into it. I graduated college on a Saturday. I got the job with the federal government on Monday, and I was drafted on Wednesday. So it was a happy 4 days.
Well, actually, when I was talking about Dallas, I wanted you to have an opinion more on the mayor and the clampdown of Dealey Plaza, that they're not going to let anybody in. You have to have...
There have been stories coming out of Dallas that they're trying to briefly outlaw the word assassination. I don't know why, because that's what happened. If they're going to outlaw anything, it would be conspiracy. But they've created a lottery, and local people, not folks from Hillsdale, New Jersey, but local people can sign up for this lottery. They're going to pick 5,000 names. The date is really unknown. It could cover a time from, let's say, November 20th to November 25th. It could be all-inclusive, or it could be just November 22nd. But only those 5,000 people with tickets are going to be let in. And if your name is Mark Lane or Cyril Wecht or Walt Brown, you ain't getting in, because the Dallas police are vetting every one of those 5,000 people.
Oh, so, it's a PR firm, I think, that's handling it, though. And who knows what they're going to do with the information.
That may well be. What I read was Dallas police, but it certainly would make more sense for a PR firm. It's wrong, because people that want to pay their respects to President Kennedy should be allowed to. And I've had all kinds of emails about, come on, we're going to get down there and we're going to raise hell. We're going to knock the barricades over. I said, I'm not. I will not do anything that would disrespect the memory of President Kennedy. And that would. There's times to pick it and times not to pick it. And the memory of John Kennedy is too important. I can write about it. I can speak about it. But I will not do anything that would embarrass November 22nd by my personal actions and something like that. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just the way I feel.
Well, it's obvious that the city of Dallas doesn't want people down there, so they're doing everything they can to tell you that you're not even. If we pick your name, you're not even going to know until October, and then that morning at some arena, you're going down there to a ticket center, and you get your tickets that morning. Like how are they going to handle 5,000 people in line to get tickets for somewhere else?
I was there for the 30th anniversary, and people got manhandled. They had security, and I was standing. I'm going to say, if you can conjure up the Zapruder film, there's a woman that's walking across the lawn when the car passes Jean Hill. I was in just about that spot, and cops came along shoulder to shoulder with nightsticks and pushed everybody from us backward out of Dealey Plaza. I wound up halfway up the side of the book depository building on Houston Street. And I said, well, what's going on? And they said, we have to clear everybody out. I said, you didn't clear out the muckety-mucks down front, that had suits and ties on. And they said, you'll be let back in. And we were. But it was ridiculous. And there were snipers on rooftops everywhere you looked. I took pictures of all of that. I mean, they had that kind of security 50 years ago. You and I wouldn't be having this conversation. It was absurd. You couldn't get through in vehicle traffic. They had huge trucks with K-rails on them blocking streets to keep the riffraff out. There's one more thing I'd like to say about the chronology, and I think it's important. People shouldn't just take like 32,000 pages. Oh my God, it's overwhelming. There's stuff you can leave behind. You don't need to look at it until, let's say, 1960 if you don't want to. So you can that takes 2,500 pages out. If you don't want to read all the Jack Ruby testimony, you can excise a bunch of stuff. If you're not interested in the history of assassinations, I hope people don't just stick it in the machine and do search, for book 2, November 22nd, because it won't make sense without what went before it. That's why it's a chronology. But the most important thing about all of it, in my mind, is that it's entertaining. Nobody could read 1,000 dry pages, much less this kind of volume. You know, where stupidity rears its head, I point at it. There are things that you just can't walk by without saying something. You know, making some sarcastic comment or making a half-hearted attempt at wit. And in that sense, it's entertaining. And a couple of people that that saw different of the files at one time or another, that's more than anything else. I loved it. It was I couldn't stop reading because it was entertaining. And there's an awful lot in there. And nobody's going to come away from that and send me an email and say, I didn't learn anything. Because there's lots to learn in there. And there's going to be a lot of lone assassin stuff this year. There's going to be a lot of conspiracy rubbish this year. On November 25th, the chronology will be a survivor. The rest of the stuff I don't know about. But this is something that could last a while. And people should get to it somehow. Either get it in their local library somehow, but get to it. If they really want to know, because my conclusions, which are separate, don't mean a hoot. Anybody that reads the necessary stuff will be able to finally say, okay, now I know what happened. And they'll have closure. Because sooner or later, you have to. I mean, my eyesight took a horrendous hit doing this for 7.5 years with grainy documents and looking at a computer screen. When I'm playing a ball game at night, I've got to sleep for a couple hours and then wake up and go right to the game. Otherwise, I can't pick up the pitches anymore. So I paid my price, and I'm basically done. I'd be happy to speak anywhere at any time to a group. Hopefully, closer to November, you and I will have another talk.
Sure, if not to promote the Cyril Wecht conference.
Oh, absolutely. We'll do something maybe late September, mid-September. Sure. Because that's a huge event, and it's JFK. It's not Malcolm X. It's not MLK. It's JFK, and he's got some good people. Yeah, and I heard nothing but good things about his previous conference. It was just it's a unique event because the people invited to speak are considered faculty. Duquesne University students can go to that seminar for credit. They have to, be there at 8 o'clock in the morning and stick around until 5, with a lunch break and whatnot. Yeah. Okay, sure. Well, we'll leave that till further on. Okay. But for now, I kind of a good note to end on. I wanted to just, sum up your chronology and let people know that it's available. You just said you've got a batch of CDs in, so people can write to you. I'll make links for that. So, pleasure to speak to you. I look forward to speaking to you in the near future then. Absolutely. And we'll just keep in touch by email. Okay. Thanks so much for spending time today then. It's my pleasure. And I have to tell you, your audience is as good a bunch of people as are out there anywhere. I hear from them, and they're good people. Well, amongst the researchers, they don't all get along, but at least people are tuning in to find out what is the latest and what is news and what's worth covering. So we'll leave it at that, and I'll speak to you in the near future. Look forward to talking to you closer to the Cyril Wecht conference. Good deal. Len, thank you so much. Okay.
President Kennedy's assassination is the most studied murder investigation of the 21st century, yet remains plagued by questions and unproven theories. Enemy of the Truth, Myths, Forensics, and the Kennedy Assassination by Sherry Feaster filters long-held beliefs in the JFK assassination through contemporary, reliable, established forensic disciplines. This book scientifically answers questions such as, can trajectory analysis prove a fatal headshot from the grassy knoll? Does Kennedy's forward and then rear movement prove two headshots? Why do some witnesses believe the limousine stopped? Is the blood in Zapruder film frame 313 proof of a rear shooter or one from the front? Enemy of the Truth, Myths, Forensics, and the Kennedy Assassination answers these questions and more. Available at JFK Lancer and Amazon.com. Or visit SherryFeaster.com.
Have you ever thought about actually getting off the grid and becoming truly self-reliant? Introducing a brand new book for independent Americans who want practical advice on how to survive and even prosper in the challenging days ahead. The Big Book of Off-the-Grid Secrets is packed with hard-hitting information on self-reliance gardening, food preparation, alternative energy, home security, and more. At 436 pages, there's simply nothing like it anywhere. Get the Big Book of Off-the-Grid Secrets by going to offthegridsecrets.com. That's offthegridsecrets.com, or call 800-206-4095. That's 800-206-4095. Order online and get our top 14 off-the-grid special reports free with your order. Reports like Cash Garden, how to grow all the food you'll ever need, and Stick to Your Guns, how to legally carry firearms almost anywhere, anytime. Plus 12 more reports worth over $350, all free with your order. Order today at offthegridsecrets.com. That's offthegridsecrets.com.
Black Op Radio presents Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty, the DVD Complete Collection. Finally, the DVD set you've been waiting for is available. Over 15 hours with Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty. Over 15 hours. Interviews with Len Osanic, John Judge, David Ratcliffe, and more. This is a one-of-a-kind set. These interviews feature Fletcher Prouty having candid conversations regarding his 23 years in the military, but specifically 9 years in the Pentagon from 1955 to 1964. His inside knowledge is invaluable to researchers of this era of American and world history. These are the revelations you've been waiting for. Over 15 hours with Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty, the complete DVD collection. Available at the Colonel Prouty reference site, www.prouty.org, and blackopradio.com. It's a political rally, a free speech zone, a town hall meeting. It's an interrogation at NSA headquarters. Now, it's time to make a statement. Time to represent. Time to let them know who you are. That you're part of the Black Op. With a brand new Black Op Radio t-shirt. Comes in all sizes. Wear it loud and proud. Join the Black Op today. www.blackopradio.com. If you believe there's more to the JFK assassination and the mystery surrounding the CIA and its covert operations, you're not alone. Meet the man Oliver Stone called X in the epic motion picture JFK. Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty comes forward with never-before-seen or heard documentation and information about JFK, the Vietnam War, the CIA, and more on a brand new CD-ROM. The collected works of Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty is an incredible offer not to be missed. For a limited time only, find the answers surrounding these issues and more with the collected works of Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty. Or visit the Colonel Prouty reference site on the World Wide Web, the collected works of Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty.